Okay, so maybe you're thinking about a career as a psychotherapist. It's more than just a job, right? It's like you're diving deep into the human experience, helping people through some of the most challenging things in life. But what does that actually look like day to day?
And that's what's so interesting about this field. It's like a blend of art and science.
Yeah.
You're not just, like applying textbook stuff.
Mhm.
You're building actual trust with people and creating a space for them to heal.
Exactly. And we're going to break it all down on this deep dive. We're using RoleCatcher. It's a website. They've got tons of career guidance, like seriously, in-depth guides, interview prep, all of it.
They go really deep into what it takes to be successful in psychotherapy. And one thing that really struck me was how much variety there is in the work. Most people probably picture one-on-one sessions, which is definitely a big part of it, but it goes so much further than that.
Right. So like picture this. You're running a group therapy session for, say, high schoolers dealing with anxiety, or maybe you're working with a whole family to figure out how to handle a member's OCD. It's not just individuals, it's whole systems sometimes.
And that means you need a really specific set of skills. Empathy, active listening, those are key for sure. Creating that space for someone to actually open up and be heard, essential. But it's not just about listening either. You need some serious analytical skills too.
It's almost like being a detective, right? You're taking in everything your clients tell you, observing their behavior, and using critical thinking to decide on the best way to move forward.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Their whole assessment part often involves working with other healthcare people, doctors, social workers, even teachers you might be collaborating to make a truly well-rounded treatment plan.
Wow, so it's a real team effort then. It's kind of amazing how much goes on behind the scenes to help each person on their journey.
It really is. And that ties into something RoleCatcher stresses. You need strong communication skills. You're not just listening, you're explaining some pretty complicated ideas to patients, having tough conversations with families, and being an advocate for your patients within the whole healthcare system.
So you're like a therapist, a teacher, and an advocate all at once. That's a lot to manage.
And that's exactly why self-awareness is so, so important in this line of work. RoleCatcher has some good stuff. This boils down to knowing your strengths and knowing where your limits are. You got to know what you're good at and when to ask your team for backup.
So it's like you're always learning and growing as a therapist, but you're also doing a lot of personal work to make sure you're the best version of yourself for your clients.
Exactly. That whole idea of being dedicated to your own growth, both personally and professionally, that's something you see a lot in RoleCatcher's guides. They really emphasize how psychotherapy is constantly evolving.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? I mean, we're learning new things about the brain all the time. New therapy approaches pop up. Tech is changing how we even access mental health care. Got to be adaptable and keep up with it all.
Which brings us to something you might find surprising. You don't actually need to go to medical school to become a psychotherapist.
Wait, really? I think a lot of people just assume it's like being a doctor, you got to go through med school.
It's a really common misconception. So while some paths do need a medical degree, like to be a psychiatrist, psychotherapy is its own thing. A master's degree is usually what you need, so it's open to people from all kinds of backgrounds as long as they're passionate about mental health.
That's really cool, actually. So let's say someone with a background in social work or counseling or even education, they could potentially be a psychotherapist.
Absolutely. And RoleCatcher's guides do a great job laying out the different ways to get there. The education and licensing requirements. They even have this tool that'll let you filter job postings based on your credentials.
Okay, so we've established that being a psychotherapist is way more than just being good with people. It takes empathy, it takes those analytical skills. You got to be a lifelong learner, basically. But what about like the everyday reality? What's it actually like to do this job?
Well, it can be super rewarding, but there are definitely challenges.
Yeah.
I mean, you're dealing with people's deepest struggles, trauma, pain, that can be rough.
Right. It makes sense. You're holding space for everyone else's heavy stuff all day. How do you even stop that from becoming overwhelming?
That's where the self-care stuff comes in that we talked about earlier. Setting boundaries is huge. Having a support system you can rely on, making sure your well-being is a priority, super important.
It's such a balancing act, you know? You're being there for your clients, but also taking care of yourself sounds like a skill in itself.
It really is. And it's something RoleCatcher talks about a lot. Like, they have a whole section on finding that work-life balance because it's different for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Some people might love having that busy private practice, while others might feel more balanced working for like a nonprofit or a government agency or something.
Exactly. And that's something to think about as you're exploring this field. What kind of environment will help you be your best self and not burn out?
Totally. And speaking of different work environments, how is tech changing things for psychotherapists these days? I mean, teletherapy has just exploded, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
RoleCatcher definitely calls it out as a big trend. More and more therapists are doing virtual sessions, which is great, right? It moves therapy accessible for people who maybe live far away from therapists or have trouble getting around.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. It really opens things up for people. But I'm sure there are some challenges too, bringing tech into something so personal.
There definitely are. RoleCatcher points out confidentiality and privacy are big ones. You got to make sure you're using secure platforms for those online sessions.
Yeah, nobody wants to see their therapy sessions end up on the news or something because of bad security.
Exactly. And even beyond the technical stuff, therapists need to figure out how to build rapport and that sense of connection when you're just on a screen.
That's so true. You're right. Like some of the most important skills a therapist has, reading body language, creating that feeling of being present with someone, that must be harder to do virtually.
Totally. And that's where continued education comes in, always learning and staying up to date. RoleCatcher stresses how important it is for therapists to be on top of the best practices for things like teletherapy and just communicating online in general.
Right. So you're not just a therapist anymore. You got to be a bit of a tech person too. Makes me think, what are some of the different specializations you can have within psychotherapy? I'm guessing you can focus on specific types of people or certain issues.
Got it. RoleCatcher has a whole section about specializations. You could work with kids and teenagers or focus on addiction counseling or even go into something like trauma therapy or get this, geriatric psychotherapy.
Geriatric psychotherapy. I've actually never even heard of that one.
Yeah, it's about mental health for older folks. It's growing a lot, especially with our population aging. More people are dealing with things like dementia and other cognitive issues as they get older.
Wow, I'm learning so much. It's amazing how much variety there is in psychotherapy. It's really not a one-size-fits-all thing. There's something for everyone, it seems.
Yeah, and that's a big part of why it can be such a rewarding career. You can find your niche, something you're truly passionate about.
But let's be real, it's not all, perfect. RoleCatcher doesn't shy away from the tough stuff either. What should people be ready for if they're thinking about this field?
Well, like we touched on before, it can be emotionally draining, for
Yeah.
sure. You're hearing about and dealing with people's pain, their trauma, their struggles every single day.
That's got to have an impact. RoleCatcher mentions self-care and boundaries a lot, but what are some other challenges that maybe people wouldn't expect going in?
The business side of things can be a surprise, especially if you're thinking about private practice. It's not just being a therapist. You got to be a bit of an entrepreneur, too.
Oh, right. You're marketing yourself, doing the finances, dealing with insurance, the whole nine yards.
Yep, all of it. And RoleCatcher actually has some really useful tips on how to manage that side of things, like the practical stuff of running a private practice.
So you need your therapist brain and your business brain, basically. I can see why this field would attract a specific kind of person, that's for sure.
Definitely. You have to have that empathy, that resilience, that genuine desire to help. But you also got to be organized, business-minded, comfortable with the behind-the-scenes stuff, too.
That's such a unique combination of traits. Makes me think back to what we were saying about self-awareness. You got to really know yourself, your strengths, and what you're not so great at to know if this is the right path for you. Yeah, no kidding. It's like you're kind of in the driver's seat of your own career, which I guess is appealing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You build the practice that fits you, your values, how you like to work.
That's so true. And speaking of values, that's something else RoleCatcher talks about. They really encourage people to figure out their why. What's that driving force behind wanting to be a therapist?
Because if you're just in it for the money, that's not going to last long, is it? You're going to burn out way faster.
Exactly. It takes so much more than that. Compassion, being really dedicated to the work, truly wanting to make a difference for people. It's not just a job. It's more like a calling.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's feeling that call, they're like, this is me, this is what I want to do. What's your one big piece of advice for them based on all this RoleCatcher stuff?
Honestly, I'd say start with yourself. Really get to know what's going on inside, your strengths, what you struggle with, what your triggers are, all of it.
Yeah, it's like They say you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Got to take care of your own mental health before you can help others with theirs.
Exactly. And it's not a one-and-done thing. You're constantly checking in with yourself, getting supervision or therapy for yourself even, making your own growth a priority, just like you would with your professional development.
So it's like the journey is as important as the destination, maybe even more so. You're learning, you're growing, you're becoming a better therapist and a better person along the way.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And honestly, I think that's why so many people find this career path so rewarding, even with the challenges. You get to see people transform. You're there for it, being a part of their journey to healing, to becoming whole.
Wow, yeah, when you put it like that, it makes total sense why people are drawn to this. It's not just helping someone, it's like you're putting something good out into the world, you know?
Absolutely. And honestly, that sense of purpose, of knowing what you're doing matters. That's something a lot of people are looking for in their work.
So I guess the takeaway is if you're listening to this and thinking about psychotherapy, don't ignore that. Do some research, check out all the stuff we've talked about, but most importantly, listen to yourself. That little voice inside might be leading you towards something amazing, something challenging, but ultimately something really, really fulfilling.
Hey, couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive on being a psychotherapist today. We talked about the skills you need, some of the curveballs that might come up, and just how much of an impact this profession can have.
It's been great chatting about all this with you.
Same here. And for everyone listening, remember, we've just scratched the surface here. There's tons more to learn out there. Until next time, keep those brains working and those hearts open to new possibilities.